Chest up, shoulders back. This is Revival Fitness, your home for gains and brains. And amidst all of the recent nonsense that we have been reacting to, let's have a general training discussion today, shall we? We are joined by our friend Ryan Humiston. I have not reacted to him in a long time. I think it's been 3 years or more since I last have, so we'll see if anything has changed. But he's got these two videos here. The science-backed shortcut to Boulder shoulders, it's insane, and science-backed shortcut for massive side and front delts. Both of them have a ton of views. And since we're talking about shoulders, I am required, legally, to provide my input. And I don't regularly watch him, I never have. I barely remember what he said the first time. I think he gave some odd tips, like squat the empty bar 100 times, and he had some little form cues that may or may not work. It was nothing that really stood out that I can recall, but I do remember that he kept making jokes about farts to the point that it was like, okay, you're trying to tell us something, bro.
Now, whether you're at home or the gym, if you're not doing sumos, it's just a matter of time before those farts start leaking out of your ass. Shoulders are pretty complex, so if anybody tells you just do heavy presses, I need you to do your best to squeeze out a fart, cup it in your hand, and feed it to him like an infant. And doing a front raise is a lot better than pressing something heavy and chewing down those farts. For chest, you're never limited by the equipment you have access to. I guarantee we all know somebody that went to jail, came back out with really developed tits and an asshole that whistles in the wind. I.e., something's about to blow out of your back when you're driving home and you will gladly shit out your spine.
But on a serious note, if you have ever dealt with digestive problems, especially when you are about to hit the gym or during training, you know it is not fun at all. I have been through it myself, and I think the biggest example for me was one night I got to the gym and I set up to do heavy Romanian deadlifts at the start of my workout. I get in, I stretch, I put the plates on the bar, do the warm-up sets, I'm all ready to go, and then my stomach growled. And you know that growl? It goes on for a couple seconds and you think, you know, I'm gonna be fine. I was about to start the first set, tighten my belt, had the straps on, and then it happened again. And that belt had to come flying off, and I went flying to the toilet. And as you can imagine, I spent a good amount of time in there. It threw off my entire workout. I still felt the effects afterward, and no matter what type of digestive problems you may suffer from, it can really be a strain on day-to-day life. But that is why the sponsor of today's video, Seed, has developed an elite probiotic and prebiotic blend to help with that. This is DS01. It is Seed's 2-in-1 symbiotic, pro and pre, that supports whole body health, not simply digestion. DS01 is clinically formulated with 53.6 billion AFU, or active fluorescent units. It delivers 20 times more active bacteria than leading greens powders. It contains 24 probiotic strains that are clinically and scientifically proven to support not only digestion, but gut barrier integrity, the skin, immune health, and even heart health. DS01 is formulated to reduce bloating and improve regularity in as little as 2 weeks. It's been clinically shown to increase beneficial gut bacteria by up to 400%, and it totally survives digestion, unlike many other brands. You can take all the probiotics that you want, but if they don't actually survive digestion, they're not of much use. And Seed has a 2-in-1 delivery system, capsule and capsule, that is designed to safeguard the 24 probiotic strains and deliver a precision release into the colon. I started taking 2 capsules a day of DS01 with breakfast about 10 days ago. Not only am I spending less time in the bathroom, but I noticed that my skin is looking clearer as well. Our gut health impacts so much about us, so you want to make sure to nourish it as much as you can. So if you want to check it out, scan the QR code on the screen right now, or click the link in the description box down below. Use my code REVIVAL25 for 25% off Seed's DS01 Daily Symbiotic.
When it comes to growing your delts, this is the most important thing to understand. And it's not the fact that based upon cadaver studies, the deltoid muscle is actually even more segmented than we previously thought.
Oh man, okay, we're jumping right into the science right off the bat here. You know, I don't know if Ryan has any formal scientific credentials, which you don't need to discuss these type of things, but it seems like now, especially with Instagram and TikTok, a lot of people that don't even have any academic backing to their name, they still will talk about the science because it's that popular as a marketing tactic.
It's the fact that if you understand fiber orientation and look at how the segments originate, you're going to notice that big, round, wide Boulder shoulders are actually mostly posterior and anterior delt. The true lateral head of your delt, the segment that's perfectly aligned for shoulder abduction, is actually incredibly small.
I've got my credentials right here. This is science. This is based.
The moment I realized this, I changed the way I trained them. And they started to grow. They went from this piece of shit to, all right.
Okay, now let's take a look at this, because they are not the same picture in terms of the framing or the distance that he is from the camera. I mean, his delts clearly grew. I don't know the length of time between these as well. This could be many years. He is definitely closer to the camera in the photo on the right. It's a better picture overall. We have a contrasting background and better lighting. The one on the left is closer to his skin tone. There's not really any shadowing happening. It's like what Jeff Nippard did in his recent video. He said how he has gotten smaller, but he looks bigger during his cut. And he compared a picture on the left. He was in bad lighting. Then on the right, he was closer to the camera under down lighting.
So let me walk you through some of the changes I've made, starting with rear delts, because most people suck at training those the most. Now, when it comes to hypertrophy training, we should either be trying to take that rear delt through a full range of motion, or my personal favorite, partial range of motion at longer lengths.
All right, we got our first study popped up. Partial range of motion training elicits favorable improvements in muscular adaptations when carried out at long muscle lengths. I'm not going to read it. Neither are you. Neither did he. Now that said, I am going to make a video coming up soon about range of motion, because it's not as black and white as a lot of people think, and I used to kind of be in that same boat too. When it comes to ROMs that are not completely full, as many would call them, they're not automatically bad, and you could even argue in some cases they are beneficial.
Because we've all seen the research, we know it works.
We've all seen the research, have we? I mean, sure, you just browsed right through the whole paper. It says resistance training at the initial ROM generally showed a superiority in comparison to final, full, and varied ROM training. So we know nothing else about the study, the methods, the participants, the exercises, any of it. No context at all. But, hey, we've all read the research apparently. Of the 1 million people that have viewed this video, how many do you think have read this paper in full? 2?
Shut up. The second, and arguably even more important factor, is being able to isolate down to the rear delt as much as possible, which proves to be incredibly difficult because either you're doing movements where your shoulder is abducted and you're working in the transverse plane and your traps screw things up, or you drop that arm down and now you're worried about your lats. So what the hell are we supposed to do?
I guess we climb on top of this ladder rig system thing.
There's actually some pretty good science on this that answers that question that we'll get into later. And I know that some people will argue that being able to isolate a muscle is not a necessity for growth. And in some cases, you're absolutely right.
Well, in terms of building muscle, no, it is never a necessity. But I'm going to guess he says the O word here. Optimal.
In one study where they had two groups of people doing leg extensions, one they told to completely feel and flex the muscle, and the other one just throw the weight up, there was no statistical difference between the two.
Okay, so yet again, in this study, we have no reference to it. We've not seen it. Nothing about it, not even like a little snapshot. So we'll take his word for it, but this is the Mike Israetel method. He sits there and says, studies show, science shows, nothing. At least Jeff Nippard will toss the paper up on screen for a couple seconds. He did that a second ago. Maybe he'll do it again.
And that makes sense because it's pretty hard to screw up a leg extension. But when they did the same thing with bicep curls, one group flexed the weight up, the other one dry humped it up. The non-dry humpers saw significantly more growth. Now, how that relates to training your delts is that there's a lot of secondary muscles that can jump in and screw things up.
All right, so he mentions dry humping versus, I guess, so-called proper form and total contraction. Yet again, how is that defined within the study? We have no idea.
We need to understand the optimal movement pattern.
There it is, like I said.
Let's start out with most people's go-to exercise, the machine rear delt fly. Now, as is, for me, it's a D, because my traps hungry hippo the shit out of this exercise, so it doesn't even make my rotation.
Well, if you can't do a reverse pec deck without your traps taking over, that sounds like more of a you problem than the exercise. I mean, the way it's designed, right? This has everything that the optimal people could want. It's totally stable. It's a fly motion, which is one of the best ways that you can remove the traps as much as possible.
We can improve this exercise slightly by just grabbing higher on the handles, and then you have yourself a D+.
In terms of the reverse pec deck, yes, I like to do a neutral grip. What I often do is put wrist wraps on, and then I press the wraps into, it's not the handle itself, it's closer in. So if you didn't have on wrist wraps, it would kind of hurt. But if you put on the wraps, it feels okay. You could also do that by holding the handles with a neutral grip, depending on the machine. But I do like that more. Another tip with the reverse pec deck too, I would sit as upright as possible. A lot of the times people lean forward to a good degree when they do these. Sit completely upright or as much as you can. That's going to help you isolate the rear delts as much as possible.
Woo! One of the things that we can do that will actually redeem this exercise is by sitting sideways and doing unilateral rear delt flies. For me, that's a solid B.
Okay, so how is the normal way a D or D plus or C minus, whatever he said? But then you turn sideways and it's improved that noticeably.
The reason being is now we're putting that rear delt at an extreme length. However, it's important to understand and control your scapulas when you're trying to create length on your rear delt. What we're trying to do is force protraction, not elevation. If you allow them to elevate, you've now engaged your upper trap, and good luck with that. A good way to visualize correctly putting them at length is just thinking about wrapping those scapulas around your rib cage. Scapulae, just in case you're an asshole.
I was gonna say, bro, you're science-based. You can't say scapulas.
Now, knowing that, it actually makes it a lot easier to put your posterior delts at length even when you're facing forward. Because all we have to focus on now is keeping those scaps depressed and punching forward. Now, I will do these as length in partials because it's not a matter of time before your traps jump in, it's a matter of range of motion. The higher you go up, the more they're gonna engage because it's just proper, healthy scapulohumeral rhythm. It's gonna happen. So, length in partials turns this exercise into an A.
Okay, so we've gone from the regular version, which is not worth doing. Then we raise the hands up a bit. Okay, maybe it makes contention. Still not good, though. Then we go to the side, and it's length in position, so it's notably better. Then we go back to the regular way with that adjustment, and now it's excellent. It seems like a lot of mental masturbation, doesn't it?
If you're wondering why I'm wearing this cool compression sock, it's because the other day I was doing single leg calf raises on the leg press and I locked my knee out a little too much. Ha! Didn't even hurt. The pop was just so loud it scared the shit out of me. Turns out my gastroc, fine. Soleus, split in half. I got stem cells in there the next day. It makes a huge difference. Case studies.
Well, it's interesting that a very science-based lifter injured himself that badly on a calf raise. But I know most of you cannot afford actual stem cell treatment, but if you want the best alternative, check out Stem Enhance Ultra from Cerule. This has been shown to increase mobilized adult stem cells in the body by 25%. This is an extra over 3 million circulating stem cells in the body after 2 capsules. I can personally vouch for this and say it helped speed up the recovery of my shoulder injury noticeably. If you want to check that out, click the link in the top corner or in the description box down below. You can get it for 20% off using my link.
Let's talk about another popular movement, dumbbell rear delt flies. Doesn't matter if you're doing them standing and you bend over or you lie on an incline bench. For me, both of them are a C at best. Now remember, when you're working in this plane of motion, your traps have to engage, otherwise there is something literally wrong with them. So the only way to limit their involvement is by shortening the range of motion, and for me, that knocks it up to a B tier exercise.
I get what he means here. I guess the question's going to be, are you simply going to do just these partials for the entire set? Is it really worth removing the traps from the rear delt work? Unless you're really trying to isolate them in terms of like an injury or rehab or prehab. But in terms of just general kind of building the upper back, do most people really have a need to isolate them as much as possible?
Now, one of my few S tier exercises for rear delts is actually by laying on this incline bench, but instead, bring your arms closer to your body, focusing on reaching out at the bottom and then scooping back. If you've ever tried it, then you know it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I agree with that. This exercise, I would call it a rear raise. Other people have different names for it, but it is very good.
The science behind it doesn't really add up. Because the posterior delts have a very similar function to the lats, which is obviously a bigger, stronger muscle, so it's going to take over and take the brunt of the load. So how can I even justify this exercise? And then one day I found it, this case study. The official name is moment arms crossing the anatomical shoulder, which sounds innocent enough, but holy hell, it is not. It's dark. What they did is wired up all the major tendons that cross the glenohumeral joint to a dynamic cadaver testing apparatus.
Oh my God.
I.e. your grandma that you loved so much that when she passed, you thought, I'm going to donate her body to science because that's what she would have wanted. This is what happened to her. They strung her up like a puppet.
So they tested this on dead people? This is a very off-putting visual.
Here's my attempt at an example of what it looked like, because I don't know if I can even show you the images from the case study because they didn't even bother cleaning off your grandma's arm. There's blood all over it. Here, I'll just show it real quick and blur it out.
What the hell is going on, bro?
What this study allowed them to do is get instantaneous internal moment arms of muscle subregions, indicating their mechanical advantage in producing torque at these particular movements. And for the most part, we know that more torque is going to mean that the muscle is more effective at that movement. We've all heard of external moment arms. In this scenario, the fulcrum is your shoulder, the cable pulling up is the force, and there's the moment arm. So just looking at it, the lat and the posterior delt have a very similar moment arm, so the lat's obviously a bigger muscle. That's going to do the bulk of the work, but you big dumb idiot, you forgot about internal moment arms. Internal moment arms have a disgusting formula that we don't need to get into, but what you do need to know is that it also factors in the insertion point of the muscle as well as the line of action. So
Oh, sorry. Almost fell asleep.
knowing that and looking at the data from the study, you're going to see that when your arm is in flexion, the posterior delt is actually better at extension of the arm, pulling it back towards your body, than the latissimus dorsi. And that has everything to do with the line of action of each of those muscles. The posterior delt is mostly horizontal, pulling straight back, while the latissimus dorsi is pulling at like a 60-degree-ish angle. We're deep in the shit today, huh?
Well, what you just said there is correct, but I don't know if we needed the entire lead-up with the horror story of a study.
A straight arm equals more torque on the shoulder. A bent arm shortens the distance from shoulder to hand, putting less torque on the shoulder to move the same amount of weight, which then equates to more lat involvement. All of that was just to prove that the lying incline dumbbell rear delt raise, where your arms are close to your body, is one of the best S-tier exercises there is because it takes your traps completely out of it, and your lats are less effective in that position than your posterior delts. This did, however, also change the way I train my lats, because I used to do cable pullovers with a real straight arm, and I felt this awful pain that I thought was in the insertion of it. And in reality, if you look at the data from that study, it's probably your teres major, because that scored even higher than the lat as well. So if you want to target your lats, you should probably bend your arms more.
I understand what he means. I experienced this myself. I've been doing the lat prayer or pull down, whatever you want to call it. I've been doing single arm, and I sort of intuitively have a bend in my elbow when I do that. I didn't even realize I was doing it until I filmed myself, and then I noticed it. But I feel it in my lat a lot with this form. Whenever I do this exercise with straight arms, I feel it a lot in my triceps. A lot of people report the same thing, primarily if done on a cable or easy bar, dumbbell, barbell, some type of free weight. When it comes to the pullover machine, I think that's the best way to do these, but most people don't have access to that.
One more quick note on this exercise. It doesn't mean keep your arms as close to your body as possible. We still have to factor in fiber orientation. And when you look at the posterior delts, you see how those fibers wrap around? The best way to think about it is put yourself in a lat spread, and that's the path you want to pull up on. That also means that the barbell version of this exercise is also S tier.
They are very good, yeah. I've not done those in a while. Either of those sort of straight arm reverse raises, I do agree with him. I think those are very, very good.
Now, cables are a tricky bastard. They can either be phenomenal or suck ass. One exercise I used to do a ton when I was younger, and I still see people do it every time I go to the gym, is that high dual cable rear delt flop. The problem is, raise your arm above your head, you're going to notice your trap is fully engaged, because it has to be. That's responsible for tilting that scapula up. That's why nobody really does side laterals above 90 degrees. Some people do, but some people are idiots.
Sounds like a dig at Mike Israel to me.
This exercise for me is a stupid F. Don't do it. The bent over unilateral version is a nice idea because, again, you're stretching across your body, but as you start to come up, the further you go, your trap screws it up. It's a D+. For me, it really just comes down to 2 exercises on here that I absolutely love. The first one being the dual cable variation, where you keep your arms close to your body because, again, it mimics the same thing we do on the dumbbells, but it's constant tension and you can kind of tilt your body back and forth to find that perfect angle. It's an S. But if I can only do one rear delt exercise for the rest of my life, which in itself is a dumb game to play, it would be this variation. The single arm rear delt partial range of motion where you're focusing on that stretch, actually turning your body slightly into it. It's a horrible stretch. It's a great connection. You only squeeze so much and you can overload it if you want to, go nice and heavy. It's the fucking best.
Okay, so he says this is the pinnacle for rear delts. I've never tried this myself. I can definitely see it working. However, he mentioned earlier that, right, the bent arm means you're going to start to get more lats involved. I mean, you can see just from this very shot, his lats are stretching a decent amount. So I guess if you totally short stroke the range of motion, like you can see him doing here, and he basically stops his hand roughly at lower chest level. For most of you, given that you're going to be novices, this is something that you don't need to really be focusing on. Get stronger at your rows, at your pull-ups and pull-downs. I'm not saying don't isolate them, but in terms of the bulk of your focus, it needs to be on the compounds.
The anterior delt and the lateral head are by far the most difficult muscles to train, and most people do it horribly, horribly wrong. For example, most people will do a shoulder press that doesn't even go through an effective range of motion. They'll start the movement with the anterior delt already in a shortened position and just shorten it even more. Or they do an incline variation like this for their lateral head, which is something I was teaching 4 years ago. Look at how young and dumb I look. I have aged a lot.
Yeah, you really have, dude. What's going on?
What I've learned along the way is that's actually a great exercise for your rotator cuff muscles. It sucks for your lateral head.
I still see people do that, like he mentioned. I don't see a point. I don't see any real benefit from it. Maybe with a cable it could be a bit better, but even so, I think it's pointless.
The more you dig into the research around internal moment arms of dead grandmas, you realize
Oh, it's this study again.
that the first bit of abduction is mostly the rotator cuff muscle, specifically the supraspinatus. So, yeah, I was giving bad advice, but at least we got your rotator cuff muscle stronger.
Well, I can give him props for admitting that he was wrong. That's more than almost everybody in this industry is willing to do.
One of the main reasons your side delts are such tricky bastards to train is because these rotator cuff muscles are more involved than most people realize. Here is a fascinating study where they did a nerve block that affected all 3 heads of the delt and then had the participants test their abduction strength at different angles, and what they found is they retained 75% of their strength in the initial range, and all the way up to 120 degrees they retained 25%, meaning that it's not what we previously thought where the first 30 degrees is your rotator cuff muscles and then it's your delt. It is a working relationship throughout.
Well, that's going to be the case with any muscle groups. It is impossible to completely isolate a muscle, no matter how you're trying to do it. You can bias something to a very large degree. That's the point of isolation exercises, to do that as much as you can. But in terms of thinking like, oh, the beginning third of the range of motion hits just this part, then it shifts here, then it shifts here. No.
The reason people have such a hard time training their anterior delts is because when you move your arm through flexion, which is just a front raise, you would think that'd be a lot of anterior delts because it's nope. Based upon the line of action, internal moment arms, it's the clavicular head of your pec.
Clavicular, the guy who takes tons of steroids and peptides to look natural after many years of lifting. Check out him in the top corner if you want to see what I'm talking about.
So I read through all the case studies that had anything to do with the delts. That way we can figure out the absolute best exercises that are backed by science so you didn't have to.
I struggle to believe that he actually did either, but we'll hear him out.
Start out with the front raise and see if we can redeem it. The fibers of the clavicular head of your pec moving through this path, which is just a classic front raise, are better flexors than your anterior delt. So this movement is a D, maybe even a D minus. And I would bet you had the same idea that I did. Let's just move away from the pec towards scaption or even the frontal plane, and that'll isolate the anterior delt more. The problem is, this case study will back it up, but common sense will tell you the more you move in that direction, you're basically just doing abduction. So you're going to bring in the lateral head. We can save this dumpster fire of an exercise because there's one thing we haven't factored in yet, and that's the orientation of your humerus. We know that when you pronate or internally rotate your humerus, you're going to get more lateral and even posterior fibers. Now, when you supinate it, that's where we're going to isolate that anterior delt.
Something I've seen recently on one side of the science-based Instagram fitness crew is that they are now doing cable front raises, and they are claiming that it's essentially the best upper pec exercise that you can do. And the logic kind of follows what he was just talking about. So a front raise is going to work your upper chest too. Is it bad necessarily though for the front delt? Or I'm sorry, the anterior delt? I don't think you can really say that. He said it was like D tier. We'll see what he comes up with in terms of better than that. But I think you're being too hard on it.
But I still probably wouldn't use dumbbells. The best I've found is with cables. And yeah, it's a pain in the ass to get into. Externally rotate those shoulders, aim at 45-ish degrees, a little greater. Let those delts stretch and pulling straight up. Takes from a D- to a B+.
So like I mentioned, that single adjustment, just going into supination with the hands and then taking the arm outward a little bit, we go from not worth doing at all up to pretty damn good exercise. It seems like we're jumping a lot of fences here, so to speak. That said, the cables instead of the dumbbells, I totally understand that.
And I know someone's going to say, yeah, but I can see your biceps are really involved. That's an isometric contraction. If you give a shit about those, you're an idiot. Say you're somebody that's stuck at home with limited equipment, you could do the same thing with dumbbells on an incline, but make sure you're not pulling in. That's going to be your chest. Supinate and drive out and away. Let's talk about pressing, because I feel like a lot of people press in a way that's not as effective as it could be. They go full external rotation, flare those elbows out, and press as heavy as they can because obviously it puts a little hair on your taint. It feels good. One of the problems with pressing in external rotation like this is you're bringing in your lateral head. That's why you feel stronger. You initiate the movement, not with your anterior delt, but by abducting up. And the second thing is we're not putting that anterior delt at an optimal length under load. I don't care if you're team full range of motion or partial reps at long lengths. Doesn't matter. We both can agree that shorter is not better.
He may very well make a dick joke as soon as I unpause it. But if we're talking isolating the front delts, I don't know why we're talking about a press to begin with. The purpose of a press is not to isolate any single muscle group.
So if you really want to stretch the delt, it isn't here. You got to follow the line of action. It's here. So for me, the classic shoulder press, doesn't matter if it's dumbbell, barbell, Smith, they're all a C. It's one of the reasons I bought this machine right here. Now, if you're somebody that gets great results with classic shoulder presses, don't listen to me. But the fact that you're watching this video means that you're probably a lot like me and just said, oh, I don't need to train them that much because I get a lot on chest day. The only way to really effectively put that anterior delt at length is by moving through the sagittal plane. And I know the first thing that's going to go through your odd-shaped head is, I thought there was going to be a lot of upper pec. Everything changes. The internal moment arms change when you bend your arm. So this is the absolute best way to press. And I know everybody's not going to have this beautiful machine, but you can do the same thing with a Smith by setting up the bench at roughly 60 degrees, grabbing closer with your hands, pinching those shoulder blades back and down.
No, you should not do that. If it's shoulder pressing or bench pressing, either one, or incline, any angle of pressing, you do not want to bring your shoulders back and down. In terms of scapular depression, simply sort of dropping them down a bit, that is okay. And you could argue that's the best way to do it. But retraction, when you squeeze them together, that is not good for pressing. That is why a lot of people get scapular winging. If you've ever taken a picture or video of your back, and it looks like you have like this little mountain range sticking out of one side, that's most likely what that is. I've had that in the past too. I know that many have dealt with the same thing. If you retract your scaps whenever you do a press, you limit all of the muscles that should be involved when it's happening, and that can result in movement dysfunction as well as pain. It's just not good to do. It can take a little bit of time to adjust to, simply doing the depression, not the full retraction, but your shoulders will drop down a bit and you sort of tighten your lats up, but do not squeeze your shoulder blades together. That is the difference. I talk about this more in a video that you can see in the top corner discussing shoulder pain and injuries and training with them.
A deep stretch of the anterior delt, and when you press, only engage high enough to flex your anterior delts. Don't let it jump into your triceps. The same applies for dumbbells, but I'll set the bench up a little bit higher because I can dictate the angle by arching my back and either press with a hammer grip or a supinated grip because then I feel like I can get a little bit more stretch. Same thing, Don't let it jump into your triceps.
Your triceps are going to be working the entire time. Even if you go that low, it's not like they magically turn off just because you do that. I mean, think about it too. If you're doing a neutral grip and you're dropping down with the elbow bent, how are your triceps not going to be working? I get what he means in terms of not pressing up that high, because that's going to stop the chest from being involved as much as it can. But we go back to the point of you cannot totally isolate things at all. It's not possible, especially on a press.
Same, but different for a traditional barbell press.
Right, how is this not going to get your triceps? It's a close grip press.
Those 3 exercises, those variations, to me are all S tier.
Okay, bro, you just showed us an excellent way to hit the triceps as well as the front delts. And then you're going to rate this as top of the line for isolating exclusively the front delts. Do you think before you talk? Something I remember now too. In the first video of his I reacted to, he said you will always get better front delt gains from a raise than a press.
For anterior delts, you're always going to get a better result from doing raises than you are a press.
So I guess he changed his mind thanks to the dead arm study. Or maybe he just forgot he said it, and this is the new thing. But in any case, this isn't totally adding up.
Any machine or variation you can think of that factors all of those things in, working in the sagittal plane, also allowing you to change the angle of your body because your body has a natural mechanism for counterbalancing itself. And in this case, if you're straight up, it's your traps. So we don't want those involved. So we want to tilt back. And then finally, stopping short of jumping into your triceps. Most everything will allow you to do that. So if you can find a machine like that, it's an S tier.
I'm trying to work this out. So if you've got like a little swing motion, I guess then your triceps are not going to really be involved, or as much as they could be. If you're kind of just doing like this motion, rocking, yeah, I can sort of see that. But with the free weights like he just demonstrated, that's very, very hard to do. I mean, you're going to have to use really light weight. And what he showed us was not mirroring that motion.
Let's talk side delts. Now, if you're somebody that lives in fear of jacking your humeral head into your acromion, then the best way to create the most subacromial space is by retracting your scaps, pointing your thumb to the ceiling, and moving through the scapular plane. But that won't do shit for you. I just felt like I had to tell you that, because every time I talk about a variation that does slightly decrease subacromial space, people get their balls tied in a knot. The truth is, shoulder impingements during side laterals are less about poor or improper form and more likely an indication that the rotator cuff muscles or other muscles involved in scapular movement are not functioning properly.
I think that is correct, yeah. I can say for myself, whenever my shoulder was bothering me recently, I could not do a general lateral raise without pain on the right side. It's not because I was internally rotating my shoulders, it was simply because my rotator cuff, or something very close to that, was damaged. So unless you were doing the really old school, like pinkies up bodybuilder form with the lateral raises, yeah, there's no way that should really hurt you.
Additionally, some people are just predisposed to shoulder impingements, meaning that they have less subacromial space to start with. They are fucked from the start. Hopefully that's not you. Because honestly, the effective way to do these is almost the exact opposite of the quote-unquote safe way. So let's go back to the standard side lateral, palms neutral, arms come out to the side, D+ of an exercise.
D+, bro, really? I mean, I think at this point now he just puts the basics low, so then he can introduce the new, more scientific stuff. Seems to be his go-to.
First thing we're going to do to make it better is internally rotate the humerus, pronate those palms as much as possible. And yes, that does slightly decrease subacromial space, but your supraspinatus is not going to dry hump the roof of your acromion because of it, because in reality, just abducting your arm decreases subacromial space. The reason we're internally rotating is to align the specific deltoid fibers we want to target. I've shown this in a previous video, but the actual fibers that originate on the lateral part of the acromion, the ones whose line of action would directly abduct your arm to the side, is a very small percentage, which means your side delt actually is mostly composed of anterior and posterior fibers that surround it. So our goal here is to line up those lateral fibers with the adjacent posterior and anterior fibers and optimize their engagement through the lateral raise.
Okay, this guy has got to go Jeff Cavalier. We need the muscle markers. We need illustrations on you, because you're doing it in the little picture here, but do it in person.
Why is this so hard to explain? You would think side laterals would be easy, but...
Well, maybe because your reasoning is flawed. And also you said side laterals. That's redundant. That's like saying sides.
To support this even further, there's been research that shows that when you internally rotate, you get less involvement from your supraspinatus, which is the dominant rotator cuff muscle involved in abduction. It shortens its internal moment arm, therefore putting more emphasis on the deltoid itself to do the damn thing. We're also going to ditch the frontal plane and move towards the scapular plane, and at times I'll actually move even slightly in from that because it's more natural on the shoulder joint.
The way he's doing the lateral raises here, this is what I just mentioned earlier. He's got the pinkies pointing up. A lot of people, if they do lateral raises this way, are going to get pain. Is that a guarantee? No, it's not. That said, your shoulders could feel totally fine, but then if you do this form, they may hurt, all else being equal. And I guess if you don't go up as high, it's probably less likelihood. Does this provide that much more benefit to the side delts? Especially for the risk that a lot of people are going to have when they do this.
This will actually help us regain some of the clearance under the acromion that we lost from internal rotation. And we're going to do one more thing. And I don't think I've ever talked about this because it's hard to verbalize all the weird things you do during an exercise, but before you even start, you're going to protract your scaps, which is just flaring your lats, and that's your starting position. What this does is that it starts the movement right where the deltoid becomes the dominant driver of abduction, skipping that initial portion, which is predominantly your rotator cuff muscles. What we're basically doing is using our lats as a wedge and letting the force of gravity in that dumbbell pull on those lateral fibers. So Frankensteining that into one exercise, we're internally rotating, we're on the scapular plane, even slightly in at times, and we're protracting those scaps to use our lats as a wedge to stretch against, and that for me is one hell of an S-tier exercise.
Is it really that much of a difference? Does it go from a crappy D- lateral raise normally to now it's an S-tier given these adjustments?
So it doesn't matter if you live with your mom and you have little to no equipment. You could take two of her vibrators, internally rotate, and before you know it, you'd have great shoulders.
Yeah, probably not.
For example, this machine side lateral, hard to screw up. I don't care how old you were before your mom let you take off that leash backpack. You can't screw these up. Inherently, they are a B+. But the way I turn this into an S-tier exercise is by doing them unilaterally. That allows me to internally rotate, flare that lat, tilt slightly back, so now I have more of a stretch on that delt. I'm also turned slightly sideways, so I'm in the scapular plane, and then I can pull up from there, and you can see it already sucks.
What also sucks are those handful of mom jokes you made in a span of about 15 seconds. But yeah, I mean, this is fine. I have no problem with it. The thing with all of this stuff, man, especially when they base this methodology on these papers, it's a lot of theory more than actual results. So, I mean, you can try this thing if you want, or anything he's mentioned, but in terms of like actual application in real life, you can have all the theories that you want and say, oh, this study finds the moment arms and all of these things, but in terms of practice, is this going to net any tangible, let alone significant, muscle growth above doing the machine normally? I have a hard time believing that that's going to be the case.
So let's revisit this exercise, because like I mentioned, I think it's ridiculous because it basically works in the range of motion that's predominantly rotator cuff muscles, but I'm open to being wrong because the more I learn, the dumber I get. So if I had to steelman this exercise, I would say the one good thing it does is it changes the angle of resistance. But if that's the only reason, then why not just take a cable, bring it up to knee level, now you have the same exact thing, but better. Speaking of cable side laterals,
once again, side laterals. It's like saying literally all the time.
In my last video, people thought I was talking shit about Dr. Mike because I said that anybody that goes above 90 degrees on a side lateral is an idiot.
You've said side lateral like 5 times now, so you are an idiot.
This has nothing to do with him. He's not wrong. The delt can generate the most amount of force at 120 degrees. That's not my point. The reason I'm not a fan of it is because we know that your ability to shorten a muscle as much as possible has really nothing to do with growth. The second thing is most people don't have a mind-muscle connection to their delt, let alone knowing what muscles to engage to be able to manipulate their scapula as they go through that full range of motion instead of just shrugging their shoulders up and engaging their traps. I know you, that's what you would do. And finally, that level of abduction is going to engage your lower traps, which, knowing you probably engage the rest of your traps and screw everything up, and the rest of your workout is going to suck balls. Because again, I know you. You're not doing great.
And that is that. Like he just kind of alluded to, most of you guys watching are novices. You don't have to focus on all of these special exercises when it comes to the shoulders or any other muscle group, especially with isolation. those are lower on the priority list, or they should be, in terms of your training. You need to focus on getting strong at the biggest exercises. It doesn't have to just be the power lifts, but general compound movements should be taking up a good amount of your training, especially as a beginner. And if you want all of this laid out for you, be sure to check out my training programs linked down below. These are time-tested by hundreds and hundreds, well, thousands even, of people. You can see testimonials and reviews on my site. For novices and intermediates, these programs, I break down everything that you need to make serious gains in the long term, not simply another list of exercises. I get some of the concepts he says, but man, it's a lot of odd reasoning, some of it outright faulty. It seems like a lot of finding special things to do as a means to say like, hey, I came up with this special thing based on a bunch of papers that get splashed up on the screen. So this is very standard so-called science-based content. Stay tuned, I have a video coming. I'm currently writing it. I'm going to compare the two main science-based sides, because people talk about science-based like it's a monolith. That is not true. In terms of using it as a marketing tactic, it kind of is, but there are different sides of so-called the science, and they disagree on so many things, yet they both claim that the science is clear and supports their positions. So go figure that out. But this has been it for me, guys. Thank you for watching. If you want to get in direct contact with me, the best way to do so is in the links down below. Schedule a consultation or fill out the coaching form, or join Fourth Wall or Patreon to direct message me. And I will catch you guys next time.